Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It is August 7th, 2026. And as I record this video, um, Hiroshima year 81, that is the 81st anniversary of the dropping of the atomic bomb on the civilian city of Hiroshima, took place on August 6th, 1945. President Truman lied when he said it was dropped on a military base. It was dropped on a civilian city. More than 100,000 people died, and virtually immediately, as well as many, many tens of thousands of deaths due to radiation sickness, not to mention the dropping of another atomic bomb on Nagasaki 3 years later. Now, without going into the sordid history of the U.S. use of nuclear weapons, the atomic tests which cause much suffering to the populations nearby, such as in the Bikini Atoll and even in the people living in Nevada, even they were subject to a nuclear fallout, and many of them died of cancer because of that. Nor the disingenuous claim that the artillery shells and bombs containing depleted uranium, which the United States uses in its munitions, that they're harmless. It's important to see what the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has to say about this topic. So I'm going to read through a statement that they made in January of 2026. And before I read that, I just want to mention also that just about a month later, the last nuclear weapons limitation treaty, the START treaty, expired in February 2026. And President Trump had expressed some interest in extending it. It was supposed to expire, earlier this year, but and President Putin of Russia had suggested that they create some kind of legalistic mechanism to extend it for at least a period of time. But Trump has basically let it lapse. I'll also mention that so Trump has let that treaty lapse. In 2018, he walked out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which had protected Europe from shorter range or intermediate range missiles, nuclear weapons. From the late 1980s until, as I say, 2018. And of course, George Bush Jr. also walked out of the ABM treaty. So you have three treaties that the United States has walked out of. Of course, it's Russia's fault. That's why they walk out. No, when you have a treaty, you keep the treaty and you figure out how to make the treaty work. You don't just walk out of it. But with the United States, we have a different policy. We can just walk out of treaties if they're not convenient for us. Ask any Native American; they'll tell you the same thing. So I'm going to be reading here from the statement of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. It is now 85 seconds to midnight. A year ago, we warned that the world was perilously close to global disaster and that any delay in reversing course increased the probability of catastrophe. Rather than heeding this warning, Russia, China, the United States, and other major countries have instead become increasingly aggressive, adversarial, and nationalistic. Hard-won global understandings are collapsing, accelerating a winner-take-all great power competition and undermining the international cooperation critical to reducing the risks of nuclear war, climate change, the misuse of biotechnology, the potential threat of artificial intelligence, and other apocalyptic dangers. Far too many leaders have grown complacent and indifferent, in many cases adopting rhetoric and policies that accelerate rather than mitigate the existential risks. Because of this failure of leadership, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists Science and Security Board today sets the doomsday clock at 85 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been to catastrophe. Last year started with a glimmer of hope in regard to nuclear risks, as incoming U.S. President Donald Trump made efforts to halt the Russia-Ukraine war, uh, insincere efforts, I might add, and even suggested that major powers pursue denuclearization. Over the course of 2025, however, negative trends, old and new, intensified with 3 regional conflicts involving nuclear powers, all threatening to escalate. The Russia-Ukraine war has featured novel and potentially destabilizing military tactics and Russian allusions to nuclear weapons use. Conflict between India and Pakistan erupted in May, leading to cross-border drone and missile attacks amid nuclear brinkmanship. In June, Israel and the United States launched aerial attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities, suspected of supporting the country's nuclear weapons ambitions. It remains unclear whether the attacks constrained those efforts or if they instead persuaded the country to pursue nuclear weapons covertly. I might add that in Ukraine, there is a major nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia, the Zaporizhia region, and the Kiev regime has been shelling that nuclear power plant. It hasn't breached the containment structure that keeps the radiation from escaping, but the IAEA has consistently refused to name where are these drones and missiles coming from? Gee, a drone and missile just happened to fall on a nuclear power plant. Gee, we can't imagine who did that, even though there are Russian scientists and engineers who are trying to maintain the plant and keep it safe. We'd have no idea who might have dropped those. Meanwhile, competition among major powers has become a full-blown arms race, as evidenced by increasing numbers of nuclear warheads and platforms in China and the modernization of nuclear delivery systems in the United States, Russia, and China. The United States plans to deploy a new multi-layered missile defense system, the Golden Dome, that will include space-based interceptors, increasing the probability of conflict in space and likely fueling a new space-based arms race. As these worrying trends continued, countries with nuclear weapons failed to talk about strategic stability or arms control, much less nuclear disarmament. And questions about U.S. extended deterrent commitments to traditional allies in Europe and Asia led some countries without nuclear weapons to consider acquiring them. As we publish this statement, the last major agreement limiting the number of strategic nuclear weapons deployed by the United States and Russia, the New START, is set to expire, ending nearly 60 years of efforts to constrain nuclear competition between the world's 2 largest nuclear countries. In addition, the U.S. administration may be considering the resumption of explosive nuclear testing, further accelerating a renewed nuclear arms race. An array of adverse trends also dominated the climate change outlook in the past year. The level of atmospheric carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas most responsible for human-caused climate change, reached a new high, rising to 150% of pre-industrial levels. The global average temperature in 2024 was the warmest in the 175-year period, and temperatures in 2025 were similar. I might add that right now in France and in Europe, the people are dying because of the excessive heat that they're experiencing. And I was just talking with a Chinese friend of mine yesterday who told me that there are massive floods that have literally taken out dams and disintegrated buildings because of the intense rainfall that China has been experiencing. Energized by warm temperatures, the hydrologic cycle became more erratic, with deluges and droughts hopscotching around the globe. Large swaths of Peru, the Amazon, Southern Africa, and Northern Africa experienced droughts. For the third time in the last 4 years, Europe experienced more than 600 heat-related deaths, 60,000 heat-related deaths. Floods in the Congo River Basin displaced 350,000 people, and record rainfall in southeast Brazil displaced over 500,000, plus the ones that I discussed just now. The national and international responses to the climate emergency went from wholly inefficient to profoundly destructive. None of the three most recent UN climate summits emphasized the phasing out of fossil fuels or monitoring carbon dioxide emissions. In the United States, the Trump administration has essentially declared war on renewable energy and sensible climate policies, relentlessly gutting national efforts to combat climate change. Turns out, of course, that China is the leader in renewable technology, so people can say whatever they want about the quote unquote nonsense about climate change, but China does seem to take it seriously. During the past year, developments in 4 areas of the life sciences have increased potentially catastrophic risks. In December 2024, scientists from 9 countries announced the recognition of a potential existential threat to all life on Earth, the laboratory synthesis of so-called mirror life. Those scientists urged that mirror bacteria and other mirror cells composed of chemically synthesized molecules that are mirror images of those found on Earth, much as a left hand mirrors a right hand, not be created because a self-replicating mirror cell could plausibly evade normal controls on growth, spread throughout all ecosystems, and eventually cause the widespread death of humans, other animals, and plants, potentially disrupting all life on Earth. So far, however, the international community has not arrived at a plan to address this risk. At the same time, the accelerating evolution of artificial intelligence poses a different sort of biological threat. The potential for AI-aided design of new pathogens to which humans have no effective defenses. Also, concerns about state-sponsored biological weapons programs have deepened due to the weakening during this past year of international norms and mechanisms for productive engagements. Perhaps of most immediate concern is the rapid degradation of U.S. public health infrastructure and expertise. This dangerously reduces the ability of the United States and other nations to respond to pandemics and other biological threats. The increasing sophistication of large language models and their applications in critical processes, coupled with lingering concerns about their accuracy and tendency to, quote unquote, hallucinate, have generated significant public debate over the past year about the potential risks of artificial intelligence. The United States, Russia, and China are incorporating AI across their defense sectors, despite the potential dangers of such moves. In the United States, the Trump administration has revoked a previous executive order on AI safety, reflecting a dangerous prioritization of innovation over safety. And the AI revolution has the potential to accelerate the existing chaos and dysfunction in the world's information ecosystem, supercharging mass and disinformation campaigns and undermining the fact-based public discussions required to address urgent major threats like nuclear war, pandemics, and climate change. These dangerous trends are accompanied by another development that undermines efforts to deal with major global threats. The rise of nationalistic autocracy in countries around the world, including a number of countries that possess nuclear weapons. This is where it gets kind of rich here. This is where the American bias slips in. Leaders of the United States, Russia, and China greatly vary in their autocratic leanings. We can't even be sure that our elections are legal. And as Hillary Clinton once said, there's a public policy and a private policy. The public policy is the lies that politicians tell us, including the fact that we have a democracy, and the private policies that benefit corporations and special interests that actually run the country. So so please disabuse yourself of the idea that the United States is a wonderful democracy. Democracy doesn't even occur in the United States Constitution. Anyway, before we criticize Russia or China, let's look at ourselves. So getting back to the text here, they all have approaches to international relations that favor grandiosity and competition over diplomacy and cooperation. I would dispute that. Both Russia and China have urged diplomacy, and the United States keeps pushing, and to the point where they're considered by the Russians agreement non-capable. They're incapable even keeping an agreement, as seen in the attack on Iran, where they're negotiating with Iran, and instead they summarily bomb them, try and take out their leadership. This is completely illegal according to U.S. law, international law, and yet they're talking about, well, Russia and China are they're part of this problem. Well, American people, please look at yourselves. It says the rise of autocracies is not in itself an existential threat, but people are saying, you mean Trump's got his finger on the button? Is there gonna be a vote in Congress to decide for Trump to push the button or not? Jesus. Anyway, the rise of autocracies is not in itself an existential threat, but an us versus them zero-sum approach increases the risk of global catastrophe. That's true. The current autocratic trend impedes international cooperation, reduces accountability, and acts as a threat accelerant, making dangerous nuclear, climatic, and technological threats all the harder to reverse. Even as the hands of the doomsday clock move closer to midnight, there are many actions that could pull humanity back from the brink. The United States and Russia can resume dialogue about limiting their nuclear arsenal. The United States just broke that off, and they show no intention of doing that. All nuclear armed states can avoid destabilizing investments in missile defense and observe the existing moratorium on explosive nuclear testing. That's one of the few things that is left. There have not been above ground or below ground nuclear tests. Through both multilateral agreements and national regulations, the international community can take all feasible steps to prevent the creation of mirror life and cooperate on meaningful measures to reduce the prospect that AI be used to create biological threats. The United States Congress can repudiate President Trump's war on renewable energy. Like they could repudiate a lot of Donald Trump's policies, instead providing incentives and investments that will enable rapid reduction in fossil fuel use. The United States, Russia, and China can engage in bilateral and multilateral dialogue on meaningful guidelines regarding the incorporation of artificial intelligence in their militaries, particularly in nuclear command and control systems. There's a theory out there that these 180 Iranian schoolgirls were targeted because of an AI mistake. So it's artificial intelligence, but it's not intelligent enough to know not to kill 180 children. Our current trajectory is unsustainable. National leaders, particularly those in the United States, Russia, and China, must take the lead in finding a path away from the brink. And this is the key sentence in this whole thing. Citizens must insist that they do so. That's the reason why I'm making this video, to alert everybody that we need to do that. And they end with the quote by saying, "It is 85 seconds to midnight." Now, I'll just mention that if I can just go back here, let me see if I can do this. This is a this is from a website that's talking about the problem of these the START Treaty. It says Russia suggested in September 2025 that the United States and Russia agree to abide by the limits in New START for an additional year, to which U.S. President Trump originally reacted positively. But Trump also has repeatedly expressed interest, as recently as January 2026, in negotiating a new agreement, including China, and seemed unconcerned about the lapse of New START. So that is where we're at. The New START Treaty has expired, and that means that both the United States and Russia are free to make as many nuclear weapons as they want. The treaty to limit them has lapsed. And I think, as I mentioned in another video, in 1984, I was talking with a congressperson in San Francisco who dropped at a restaurant where I was working. And I said, we've got 40,000 nuclear weapons, and Russia has 40,000 nuclear weapons. Do we really need more? He said, well, if they've got 40,000, we need more than them. Well, they did cut that way back to roughly 5,000 nuclear weapons each. But with this lapse of START, that number can go up again. So that's the problem. So I wanted to bring this all to your attention, and I'll finish with a quote that I think everybody should keep in mind. And I have everybody, you should all go to my store and buy my T-shirt. Okay, it says, "The unleashed power of the atom has changed everything save our modes of thinking, and thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe." So we're still thinking in 19th century and pre-19th century win-lose thinking, and the United States is absolutely determined to maintain hegemony over the rest of the world. The rest of the world doesn't want to do that, and as a result, we're seeing endless wars. And of course, Russia is on the receiving end as we speak of missiles that have fallen on Russian territory, which never even happened during the Cold War. The United States didn't dare to do that, but now they do dare to do that. And for that reason, there are voices within Russia that are saying, if they're going to do this to us, maybe we need to drop a few nuclear weapons on them, and so that they kind of get the message. I'm not advocating that at all, but the kind of reckless attitude that the United States has on provoking Russia in this war that the United States did provoke by the coup in 2014 is like beyond the pale. So the burden really is on us as citizens of the United States to call your Congress people, organize demonstrations, and put a stop to this madness that the people who are running our country are involved in. So that's what I have to say about this. Again, thank you very much for supporting my channel, which you can do, as I say, by buying it. This is not about me. This is about changing our way of thinking. That's what we really need to do. And if everybody wore this T-shirt, people would say, gee, maybe we need to get Donald Trump and the Democrats, because they're the guy that I spoke with in 1984 was a Democrat. Okay, so don't think that the Democrats don't share in responsibility for this nuclear madness that we're involved in. And speaking of biological warfare, Victoria Nuland, the person who was under the Democratic administration, noted that there were biological research facilities in Ukraine which we don't want the Russians to get their hands on because they have biological weapons facilities there in Ukraine. So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to deal with, and we really need to, wake up and pay attention to it and do something about it. So again, thank you for listening, and please like and share this. You can make a donation to my website, to my Substack, or you can buy a T-shirt, or you can go to buy me a coffee, or you can even send a few bucks to PayPal. But it's perfectly okay for you not to do that. I'm never going to demand that people pay for this. Truth is priceless. But what you can do is share this information with people, and we need to build a movement where where our country can take responsibility. Just as in the 1980s, I was active in the anti-nuclear movement, and we did create a treaty which did last, from 1988 to 2018. So it wasn't permanent because Donald Trump welched on it, but at least for some period of time, things improved. So that's what we need to do. We need to get active about this. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again soon.